So here we are in 1758 in Clash of Monarchs. You see one of the effects of during the winter, the devaluation of the dollar. Basically, a number of different economic effects take place each turn. That's one of the options the Prussians have. They took it, it reduced their morale, their national will, as it were, monarch's will, whatever you want to call it. Gave them some more cash. They were, right now they're at 5 after building, etc. Austria made some big money over the turn and tried to build, but they didn't get all their builds. Building is kind of random in the game. You roll on... I don't think I went through this. You roll on this recruitment table. You get to choose how many dice you want to play with. You can go up to, as long as your country's not exhausted, for the big countries, 3 dice plus 6, which has a actually fair chance of getting you into the high range there. The problem is you don't know what you're going to get and you don't know what you're going to pay. You have to pay what you roll, and you can take whatever forces you get. So you got to kind of make a decision how big a roll you want to make in each case. Anyway, even if you make a choice to go for a big roll, you may not get the troops you wanted, and that seems to be what happened with the Austrians. During diplomacy, one of the things, the French upped their subsidies to Austria, and Russia for that matter. The English still haven't chosen to make any subsidies. One thing I found out, fleets are indeed covered by the cards. I haven't played it yet, but I found the Russian fleet card in here, so I'm assuming everyone's got a card that they can deploy their fleet with. Apparently it's not, for example, the French fleet card does not allow that. Well, there is no French fleet. Maybe the English fleet card allows it. Yes, the English fleet card does allow the play of the English fleet. So, I should have noticed that, but the Russian fleet card also allows the play of the Russian fleet into the Baltic. So there is a way to get it there, and the Russians will be doing that, not that the Brits know right now. But that is an interesting factor to the game. So what's happened? Outside of the economic and political choices, and everybody chose the same diplomatic actions as was historical, the A choices there. Well, Halley's Comet, I have to roll for that every turn. It didn't come up this turn, but it could switch the order of play, and it increases the chits and cards available in the game. That hasn't happened yet. On the events for the Imperial demands, Louis wants victories. Louis has to... The French have some advantages, but they have to make an attack, and pretty much they have to do it against Cumberland. He's the only one with forces enough close to them. That may again prevent the attack Hanover combat options from taking place, but we'll see. I'm not sure what will happen there. But he has to engage Prussians to affect the requirements for the diplomacy chart, which looks pretty clear to me. And I actually printed out the living rules for that sheet just to make sure. And, oh, not that sheet. I printed out the sequence of play, but I looked it up in the living rules, and it appears exactly the same. So that was one of the things I had a real question about, and it doesn't seem to have been resolved in the living rules to my satisfaction. It would also be nice if they told you how the fleets were activated. The British one, yeah, you always have that in your hand. The Russian one, very seldomly. Okay, so the Prussians start things off because they're still the first player. We had an event that they drew causing more desertions, and they used that same card as before. Here it is. Winterfeld's agents, which allows them to force the Austrians to play with their hunk of their hand face up, and to activate two commands. One of their commands moved to Leipzig under Henry still, and the other one, Frederick, marched his way out of Prague and down to Brunn, and there he's going to engage Charles in what may well be the battle that determines how the war goes this year. Of course, we still got a big Russian stack coming. I don't know what's going to happen with that. So at the end of that battle, we see a huge die roll difference. Both sides were able to get their modifiers up to +7. The Austrians actually had a humongous force, 40-something troops, which gives them a +1 there. They both played tactics, an able advisor to give the Austrians a 4 morale. That didn't help because the result the Prussians got on them was all the way at the bottom of the chart, 9R star plus. The star means a leader casualty. I haven't actually allocated that yet. The Austrians, with a roll of 4, ended up on the 11, which caused 64. That's enough to demoralize the Prussians, because they're demoralized, and only barely actually. I mean, one roll lower, they wouldn't have been. Because they're demoralized, it's not a crushing victory. Otherwise, it would have been. Because it's a rout, some captures were made, and an artillery piece was damaged because of the plus result. Charles is pulling back to Prosnitz. Actually, he has to pull back all the way to Olmütz, and he's routed now. So I get him a little route marker. But that's a major victory for Frederick that he wasn't counting on. Now he's going to siege Olmütz. You might be saying, oh, what about them Russians? Well, turns out the Prussians have a handful of cards to stop the Russians from making it any further. We'll see how that plays out, but there's going to be a lot of interrupts there. So that's going to be kind of interesting. All right, we'll go on to the Austrian turn, but this is that's a bloody start. So on the Austrian turn, they played Kleiner Krieg and a heavy card, a 3-point card, in order to worsen Friedrich's supply status. They should be able to improve that in time for the siege, as far as I can tell. I'm not positive of the situation there. But as of right now, that's kind of an unpleasant situation. I had kind of screwed up and forgotten to move one of his supply markers up. I took care of that. I'm always making mistakes in games and correcting them. So, just in case you saw something that looked, hey, how did he do that attack? Well, he could have gotten the supply point there. On the French side, they played one of their big cards, the En Avant card, which gives them a whole pile of forces over at Venlo. They're planning, they have the Louis wants battles or victories or whatever, so they're going to go forward and attack Cumberland. Well, he wants to have a decent-sized force when he does that. Then, just as the British went, he played another card, the supply breakdown card, which I thought would have more effect than it did. It disrupted all the British supply and sent all their units into, well, sent their major force into severe supply status, or short supply, or whatever. Critical supply, sorry. However, these automatically recover at the end of the turn. Basically, it stopped the Brits from doing anything this turn. I thought it was going to soften them up for an attack. Silly me. So the Brits, for their card, played Wooing the Danes, and the French responded with a negation of that, the Danish subsidy, and so nothing's happened there. It's on to the Russians. And I finished things off with the card I was looking for, the Russian Baltic Fleet, which brings it out of the force pool and onto the table. And that makes me much happier knowing that there's a way for the Russians to actually get their fleet on the board. So event phase-wise, we had Halley's Comet, which changes the order of play, among other things. It's a particularly bad time for this to happen for the Prussians, because it means that Austrian demoralized army will get a chance to rally before, and the Prussians were planning on doing a converging attack from Frederick, leaving a screen for the garrison perhaps, and Keith, and try to crush them. So that turns out it just happened at a bad time for Prussia. Overall, it may actually be okay because it means Prussia goes after Austria, so they get to move. I don't think it's a real disadvantage to be able to move after. I don't think it's a terrible advantage either. I think the only real change is, wow, there was this one moment where things went really bad. I don't think it makes much difference otherwise. So in addition to that, all the decks got reshuffled, and Prussia and Austria got some additional cards for the wider war. From what I can tell, France, Russia, and Britain don't have those, unless I screwed something up. And everybody got more combat chits in their pools, different ones, changing the flavor of battle. A lot of people got new troops, light troops in general. So we've got a lot more of these Kleiner Krieg units in play. Again, I don't know how much that's going to affect the overall play because the balance isn't too far. The Prussians got a big pile of them now. The Brits got none. And then the typhus event showed up. And that doesn't do much. It reduces the effectiveness of the French fleet. And the French fleet becomes a regular draw card from now on. So the British control the waves, as they historically did at that point. Okay, I was wrong about a lot of things. One of which was there are some French and English wider war cards. I looked through my hands and saw some there. I don't think any had been played in any really important manner. None were, in the discarded one-time only events. So I haven't screwed up too badly. I replenished the hands and reshuffled the decks based on that. I saw some cards that didn't make sense in my hand, actually. So what happened? Well, the Russians and the French. The Russians moved their fleet, so they now have supply. But the Russians and the French both got kind of trumped by interrupt cards to prevent them from doing anything. The French took massive, massive losses in troops again this turn. 5 from the conjunct operations and 3 from the livre astray failed payments. Plus a light unit, which means there is still a light unit over there. Anyway, basically everything was frozen. The Austrians managed to recover, as we noticed. The Prussians continue their sieges, neither of which went anywhere. That's about it. There's a lot of little actions in each player's turn that aren't in most of the CDGs. So there is a bit more complexity on each player's turn. Most of the normal CDGs, you play a card, you either run the event or you pay your points to either do one kind of action or maybe a combination of actions. In this, there's a whole series of things you do in your turn. Running from moving the boats and some kind of administrative movements where you can move leaders and supply depots around. Well, not supply depots so much. Then you have the supply segment. You can play a card, get some supply points, and also do supply actions during that time. Then during the strategy card phase, you have the basic meat of most of these games in this tiny section, but there's, this whole section is a player turn. Then you get you get a couple of extra actions where you can, besiege things that you're currently sitting on. You can do an administrative action with a small force. Then you get an automatic siege roll. And then you go through the rally and resupply stage. So there's a lot that happens on each player turn, which is not usually the case in most of these games. And I think it adds to the meat of the game, but it also adds to the difficulty. and the downtime for other players. Well, yet another corrected mistake. I was wrong. There were no captured Austrians from that last battle because the Prussian army had been demoralized. I misread something. We just had another fight, actually two of them. The Austrians activated a major campaign and launched an attack with the Imperials against Leipzig again, and that failed again. No big surprise there. We're beginning to see that Imperial force whittled down quite severely. It's probably going to have to withdraw. However, Charles launched a march here against Zwickau, and it looks like Frederick kind of screwed up. His supply chain was such that it would be broken if that space was taken. If you count the line, you can go 1, 2, 3 down to Iglau, and 1, 2, but then he can't get through Zwickau. It looked like he had a decent line, but he doesn't. That space was important. So he intercepted into there, giving up his siege of Brunn, and fought another big battle. Actually took more casualties. He took 8, the Austrians took 6. Both sides were routed, but because Frederick had a better leadership ability, he was able to remain only demoralized. If both sides can't rout. Losses obviously were heavy. The Prussians had to start taking cav losses. They took half their losses as cav because they're right at the edge of taking the penalty for being too heavily cav based as a unit. And now we'll go on to the Prussian turn, I think. And after the third round, what did we have? We moved the Russians forward. The Prussians actually played the poor forage and fodder card. Now that hurt the supply status of the Russian army, but it recovered after moving. And it also slowed it down a little bit. Perhaps a wasted play, actually. I keep forgetting how limited the effective supply is on this. Then going on, the Brits and French. The Brits tried to do a colonial action. The French used their last sort of free use of their navy, because now it goes into the deck normally because of the typhus, and canceled the British action. And then the French tried to act using the Louis I's victories, and the English used the Belle Ile versus Duvarney, which slowed the French down and made it so that they didn't make it there. They brought the Imperials with them and are using them as garrison troops now for their supply line.